This video is not intended for children.
Hello everyone, our topic this week was requested by Elias Filipovitz. We'll be going over the Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar.
So, quick explanation. Warhammer Fantasy, hereafter simply referred to as Warhammer, and Age of Sigmar are sort of sister settings, with one world preceding the other. Warhammer experienced a Ragnarok event that ended and restarted the world with a whole bunch of changes, and that new world after Ragnarok is the Age of Sigmar setting. It basically let the game designers give their fantasy world a soft reboot and implement a bunch of lore, mechanical, and unit changes while still keeping access to the old mythos and units from Warhammer Fantasy. We'll get to all of this as it relates to the Skaven in a bit, but for now, let's start back at the beginning, in the Warhammer setting. The Skaven are one of the oldest races in Warhammer. They are also arguably the most vile and reprehensible of all of the factions in the world. If you're familiar with Warhammer, you're probably familiar with its grim, dark aesthetic. None of the factions are exactly teeming with chivalry and righteousness, but they all have redeemable qualities, or perhaps at least redeemable individuals that can be pointed to as examples of why that faction isn't completely reprehensible, even though many of them are very close. Skaven have no such qualities. The Skaven are a race of anthropomorphic rat people and embody all of the worst traits of real rats combined with all of the horrific beliefs about rats, true and otherwise, that societies tend to believe about rodents, with some genuine evil, dark magic, and horrible culture thrown in for good measure.
The origin of the Skaven race is technically unknown. The Skaven themselves aren't interested in cultural history, so they don't keep detailed records on a societal scale. There is an in-universe legend, though, known as the Doom of Kavzar, that most of the fanbase considers to be the story of their origin. First, because there's really no other explanation given, and second, because the legend prominently features a temple bell tower, and one of the most prominent features of the Skaven capital, Skavenblight, is a temple bell tower to their god, the Horned Rat. The legend speaks of an ancient city, Kavzar. The city was split in half, with humans living on the lush surface and dwarves living in great carved halls below. At some point, the people of Kavzar got it into their heads that they should build a tower, a monument to their gods that would pierce the heavens, as an offering and show of adoration to their various deities. For generations, they toiled, building this tower ever higher, until the sheer exertion of building a structure that tall, with medieval tools, began to slow the work to a crawl. At that point, a gray-robed figure appeared and promised the people of Kavzar he could complete the tower in a single night, so long as he was allowed to add dedications to his own god to the tower's walls alongside all the others. The people agreed and gathered that night to see the finished product. The tower was complete, but the doors were shut fast and the stranger was nowhere to be seen. At midnight, the bell atop the tower struck 13 times. Over the following weeks, natural disasters ravaged Kavzar. Food became scarce as rats began swarming the city in increasing numbers and sizes, and the people became divided as food dwindled, and eventually everything and everyone, both above and below, who didn't flee, was consumed by the rats.
This is actually an excellent illustration of how the Skaven work. Their strength lies in numbers and cunning, because Skaven are, individually, the smallest and physically weakest race in Warhammer, standing around 4 to 5 feet tall on average and carrying less physical strength than the average human, dwarf, elf, orc, etc. They make up for these deficiencies by being both agile and twistedly brilliant. The Skaven's speed comes packaged with an exceptionally short lifespan. Barring mystical enchantment, it seems they can only live into their early 30s, but most Skaven don't make it past 10 or 12, for reasons that will become obvious shortly. They also have a heightened metabolism, and combining that with the fact that Skaven spend most of their time underground, where it's much harder to create and manage food than on the surface, most Skaven are hungry, some borderline starving, all the time.
Their culture is broken up into a caste system largely determined by fur coloration, with brown, the most common fur color, relegating most Skaven to average citizenry, craftsmen, miners, slavers, etc., with the weakest among the brown-furred Skaven being relegated to slavery alongside any captured surface folk. It is technically possible for a Skaven to work up from slave to free brown-furred rat, but difficult and uncommon. Black fur is considered a sign that the Skaven in question is a natural-born killer, so those born with black fur are taken to be raised as elite warriors. Occasionally, skilled brown-furred Skaven can be inducted into the ranks of these elites, and such rats often dye their fur black. White fur is considered a blessing by the Horned Rat himself, and those born with white fur are trained as the elite guard of the ruling Skaven Council, more on them in a moment. Those few rats born with both white fur and horns, no other color of rat ever grows horns, are considered to have been blessed and claimed by the Horned Rat, and as such are trained as priests for the Horned Rat, who pull double duty as powerful mages.
The Skaven are a species of dichotomies. A lot of things about them as individuals and as a culture seem to clash, but somehow come together to create one of the most dangerous forces in the Warhammer world. The governing thoughts of most individual ratlings are fear and ego. The Horned Rat is essentially the embodiment of all things Skaven, a massive horned Skaven god that delights in corruption and evil, demanding his children spread across the world, covering, corrupting, conquering, and finally devouring the entire thing. He is as hungry as the rest of the Skaven, and not choosy about who or what he devours. Just like one Skaven will devour another given the chance, this is the fate of many Skaven slaves, the Horned Rat will devour the Skaven wholesale if he is not supplied with lives from the Skaven foes. As such, sacrifices to him are often made, numbers increasing when it is believed the Horned Rat is displeased. On top of this, their culture is one where backstabbing and treachery is viewed not as a vile act, but simply the way of life. With the simple fact being that if a Skaven wants to survive, they must take out the competition before the competition gets them. All low-ranking Skaven look on their betters with envy, seeking any opportunity to rise to their place, while all high-ranking Skaven look to their subordinates with suspicion, knowing that a knife will end up in their ribs if they're not careful. This infighting evidently amuses the Horned Rat to no end. The only thing that holds Skavendom together, and sometimes just barely, is the Council of 13, the closest thing to an absolute ruling body that the Skaven have. The Council is made up of the 12 most prominent and powerful Skaven, each the leader of one or more clans, and one the leader of the Horned Rat's priests, with the 13th seat remaining perpetually empty, but symbolically representing the will of the Horned Rat himself. The Council has had a rotating roster of members for most of Skaven history, because any Council member could be challenged at any time for their seat, and whoever survived took the Council seat. The Council's membership stabilized later on, but we'll get to that.
Barring the story of their creation, the first notable event from Skaven history was the event that would lead to the Ratmen spreading across the world. The Skaven nation began in, around, and under the city of Skavenblight, but the surface was considered far too dangerous to travel any great distance, and tunneling by hand was taking far too long. So, in order to expand, the Skaven mages came up with a plan. The Skaven are one of the only factions known for the routine and prolific use of a substance most commonly called warpstone. Warpstone is a black and green glowing ore that is essentially pure, solid chaos magic, with deposits growing beneath the earth here and there, but most of it rains down as meteorites from a giant hunk of warpstone known as the Chaos Moon that floats erratically through the night sky. While powerful, warpstone has a tendency to create unforeseen side effects when used and commonly corrupts those who spend too much time around it, driving them mad, twisting them to evil, and etc. The Skaven don't care about the nasty side effects, only the power warpstone holds, so they use it all the time and covet the stuff dearly. As such, this plan the Skaven sorcerers came up with was to use the entire nation's stock of warpstone in a great magical ritual. The result was an explosion on such a scale that the entirety of the Old World, the primary continent on which most of Warhammer's events take place, was affected. Earthquakes shook the continent, long-dormant volcanoes erupted, mountains shifted, plains were turned to valleys, and most of the land in and around Skavenblight was ruined utterly. The city itself was destroyed except for the Horned Rat's bell tower, and most of the Skaven were wiped out in the process. In the wake of this destruction, the precursors of the Council of 13 were first formed, and they united the surviving Skaven and tunneled back down to the underground ritual chamber from whence their sorcerers had enacted this world-shattering ritual, as all of their tunnels had collapsed as a result of the explosion. Despite the damage to the Skaven populace, they discovered that the ritual had, in essence, been a success. Great cracks had been torn through the earth for miles in all directions, giving the Skaven already open tunnels to begin traveling into and burrowing through, many of which connected to older dwarf-made tunnels already, while others were separated by comparatively narrow stretches of rock. In short, the Skaven had fast-tracked their ability to tunnel across the entire continent, and they began to do so.
The Skaven split off in all directions after this, with most of them keeping in touch and reporting back often, while others disappeared either permanently or for years and centuries at a time. Within a few centuries, the Skaven had literally spread across the entirety of the Old World, with one clan of Ratmen even tunneling beneath the ocean to a whole new continent and spending a few centuries there before returning home. Thus, the Under Empire was formed. By the time of Ragnarok, Skaven settlements existed beneath nearly every surface settlement in existence. As they spread across the land, various clans came up with new and ingenious methods with which to strengthen the empire and/or wage war. The 4 most notable examples include a clan that learned to breed giant rat monsters as well as other war beasts, great and small, a clan that learned to harness, manipulate, and create horrific diseases, which it turns out Skaven are in general more resistant, though not immune to, a clan that traveled to the Far East and basically came back as ninjas, and a clan that blended magic, warpstone, and steampunk science to create powerful weapons and engines of war, travel, excavation, etc.
It would be centuries before all of these clans and discoveries were made and returned to the Under Empire. In the meantime, the Skaven continued to expand, and as they did so, they discovered a mountain that had the largest deposit of warpstone they'd ever seen buried beneath it. However, one of the biggest power players in all of Warhammer, Nagash, a powerful necromancer, the powerful necromancer in Warhammer, was using that particular bit of mountain as a base of operations. For more than 100 years, Nagash's undead forces and the Skaven fought each other to a stalemate, with the Skaven finally considering admitting defeat and moving on, considering the constant level of resources needed to maintain the fight against Nagash, when something surprising happened. Nagash offered a truce. If the Skaven would assist him in his sorties against his enemies, Nagash would send them shipments of warpstone from within his mountain. The Skaven, greedy for warpstone, agreed, but kept an eye on Nagash, which turned out to be a good plan because, short version, they discovered a plot from Nagash that would wipe out all life in the world, the Skaven included. In retaliation, the Skaven, knowing none of their warriors could stand against Nagash in single combat, crafted a warpstone blade of tremendous power and snuck it into Nagash's compound, freeing a warrior king Nagash had captured, giving him the blade, and helping him to slay Nagash, ironically saving the world in a bid to protect their own lives, probably the only positive contribution to history the Skaven have ever made.
Nagash would eventually return, but not before the Skaven had mined the warpstone deposit dry and moved on. They then proceeded to wipe out scores of dwarves, tunneling up from beneath dwarven settlements, some holding the Ratmen back better than others, while waging war on surfaces elsewhere. The world got a break, however, when those Plaguemaker rats we mentioned earlier returned from across the ocean. They'd learned to manipulate diseases in the sickness-ridden swamps across the ocean before the locals, the Lizardmen, kicked them out completely. So the Plaguemakers returned to the Under Empire, triggering a centuries-long civil war to gain access to membership on the Council of 13, which eventually they were grudgingly given. The ninjas returned to the Under Empire in the middle of this, pledging their service to the Council of 13. Since the other 2 major clans were formed from within the Under Empire, the full might of the Skaven nation was now assembled. The Skaven then turned their new plague-making powers to the surface world, crushing everything in their path until the Skaven caught the plague themselves, weakening them enough to allow the surface kingdoms to crush the Skaven forces and drive them back beneath the surface for a time. More surface campaigns were made shortly afterward, also ending in defeat, triggering another civil war as the Council and the various clans blamed each other for the string of failures on the surface.
This second major civil war raged for hundreds of years and threatened to destroy the Skaven completely, and they were gone for so long that the existence of the Skaven faded into myth. No accord could be made, and the council could hardly maintain order. Finally, the priest of the Horned Rat summoned representatives of every clan to Skavenblight, and there enacted a sacrificial ritual that summoned the Horned Rat himself. Reaching through a great hole in the sky, the Horned Rat devoured dozens of Skaven as they cowered before him. He then informed them that while he found their civil war entertaining, it was time to get back to the business of conquering the world. Finally, he placed down a 13-sided pillar of pure warpstone, engraved for the tenants of the Horned Rat, and declared a new process for becoming a member of the Council of 13, along with a declaration that their will was to be absolute. Applicants would have to touch the warpstone pillar. If they were favored by the Horned Rat, they would live. If they weren't, they died. Any who survived could challenge a current member of the 13 for a seat. By the end of that day, the 12 members of the council had been chosen and were subsequently empowered by their deity. Those 12 remained as the members of the council until Ragnarok, with a few having their position challenged here and there, but none ever falling in combat against the aspiring Skaven, and yes, their lifespans were mystically enhanced. The Skaven then bided their time until Ragnarok, poking and raiding at the edges of surface civilization, manipulating things that, intentionally or not, occasionally sparked battle between surface nations, but mostly, the Skaven waited and prepared for a time when the surface world was weak. That time came during Ragnarok.
The Skaven's big power play was destroying the Chaos Moon, causing it to rain down as destructive warpstone meteors across the world, which would probably have killed everything if it weren't for the Lizardmen stopping most of it. For those familiar with Vermintides 1 and 2, they take place during this end-of-the-world situation. Before everything was consumed and the world was reborn in the Age of Sigmar, the Horned Rat pulled Skaven blight into his realm, preserving the Skaven even as many other races and societies burned as the world died and was reborn. In Age of Sigmar, the Horned Rat has taken the name the Great Horned Rat as his power has grown, having become a full-blown Chaos God, taking Slaaneish's place, though the other three gods don't like him at all. Duh. Age of Sigmar's world is broken up into a series of different planes, mystical worlds floating around that you have to pull magical shenanigans to travel between. Considering this, the Skaven seem to have done the impossible. While hanging out in the Great Horned Rat's personal dimension, the Skaven kept tunneling and expanding as they were wont to do. At some point, they tunneled so deeply into the Great Horned Rat's realm that they broke metaphysics. They caused the Warp, the Chaos Dimension, to collapse into their realm, which collapsed into the rest of the Age of Sigmar realms somehow, with the end result being that Skaven can now somehow magically tunnel beneath any of the various realms to pop up wherever they want, on any realm. Not unlike what they were able to do back when everything was on one planet. Technically, anyone who finds them can use the Skaven's tunnels, but they're dangerous, and if they collapse, you kind of fall out of reality. So the Skaven are the only ones crazy enough to use them.
And that's basically the Skaven. Crazy Ratman Empire from Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and maybe share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for videos you'd like to see in the future, do like Elias Filipovitz and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore, let's play, or other, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons, signing off. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more like it, hit that subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, click the link on the left.
Thank you to all of our patrons for making these videos possible.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.